This book is so good. Hey everyone, Professor August here, and today I'm going to be talking about Nnedi Okorafor's Death of the Author. It was published by HarperCollins in 2025, and my god, it is definitely worthy of a top 10 list. It definitely is in my top 10 list of all-time favorite books. Before I even get into what this book is about and who the characters are, just personally, I'm going to just say this up front. This is not going to be an objective review. It's very subjective because I did enjoy it that much. Um, I was drawn in initially because of the title, Death of the Author, and I'll talk about the title later on in the video. But I teach Roland Barthes' Death of the Author in my courses, and so Barthes is a very prominent figure in my teaching. And so initially I was just drawn in by the title. And then I read the synopsis, and the synopsis seemed really cool, so I got the book. And then I started reading it, and just in the first, I don't know, 20, 30 pages, something happens that I thought was just freaking hilarious. I laughed so much because almost exactly the same thing happened to me. So the main character, Zelu, she lives in Chicago, and her family also lives nearby, south side of Chicago. I went to school in Hyde Park in Chicago at the University of Chicago, and the main character, Zelu, is an author who is teaching creative writing at a university, and we don't get the name of the university, but her students start complaining about her because she's just too brutally honest with the students, and then she gets fired. That to me was the funniest. I took a picture of that passage and sent it to friends. I handed the book to my spouse and I was like, you have to read this section. It was just so funny because I've gone through the exact same thing. And then there are just so many personal connections to this book. So I had a smart car when I lived in Hyde Park, and the main character's sister has a smart car. And I don't know, there's just so many cool little connections that I have to my personal life. And so it just made me want to read more and more. So on top of the wonderful cake, the sprinkles and the frosting and the cherry on top was just a fabulous, fabulous story. So I don't know the author, but kudos to her. It's such a wonderful book. This book is about a lot of different things, but there's sort of two books in one. So one is the main linear plot, which is the character of Zelu and her life in Chicago as a writer, and then there's a secondary plot, and I don't really. I shouldn't call it secondary because it's really integral to Zelu's story, but it is the book that she's writing. And that book is called Rested Robots. So I'd say 75% of the book is Zelu and what's happening with her, and then about a quarter of the book are chapters from the book that she's writing. So I'm going to try to keep this as spoiler free as possible because you have to read this book. It is phenomenal. But her story is really interesting. So she's an academic, a writer, a teacher. She's Nigerian American. She's paraplegic because she had an accident when she was a child. And she gets fired from her writing job at a university, and her family is super not supportive. They're the typical Nigerian community, and they don't support her decisions. And you don't have to be Nigerian to understand this family structure. Like if you have a Mexican family or a Persian family or a Turkish family or a Chinese family, you understand what's happening in the family structure. So she's kind of the ugly duckling, black sheep of the family. She does her own thing and her family just rips her apart. But so the story begins with her losing her job and then just spiraling and deciding, I'm just going to write a book for myself and to hell with it. So she starts writing Rusted Robots. And as she publishes the book, her life changes dramatically. Like she goes from zero to hero. Everybody loves her in public. The fans online love her. The media loves her. She becomes really famous and really rich, except her family just doesn't get it because she's not a doctor, she's not an engineer, she's not a lawyer like her siblings are, and she's very individualistic. And so this creates a lot of conflict between herself and her family dynamic. I'm not going to give too much away, but there's a lot about technology and the way that she moves around the world and the way that um, the world has to accommodate somebody like her who has a disability. She's in a wheelchair, and she's trying to figure out ways to become more and more independent because she's looking for freedom, freedom of mobility, but freedom also of social constraints, the way that her family sees her and the way that society sees her. So that's her main storyline. And then the book that she's writing is called Rested Robots. And I can't really talk too much about that because it'll give too much away. But it is about a post human world in Nigeria. So all humans on Earth are kind of gone, except for one. And the main characters in this Rusted Robots book are a Hume, so a character who has is a robot, and a ghost or a nobody who is AI, and they kind of have to work together to save AI kind or robot kind because of something that's going to happen that's going to destroy the world. So these are the two sort of plot lines that we're going back and forth between. There's like it's really smooth, so it's not like you're reading two books that are not connected to one another. They're actually super integrated and really well connected. And uh, that ending, my gosh, that ending is just one of the best endings to a book. It surprised the hell out of me. I did not see it coming, but so good, so good. There are a lot of characters in this book, but I think there are like four that we kind of have to focus on, and the rest of them just sort of revolve in and out of Zelu's life. Um, so there's Zelu herself. So I'll talk about her in a minute. There's Mrs. Z, who is her boyfriend. Yes, her boyfriend, her love interest, and he's a huge sort of supporter and just always there cheering her on. He's not super fleshed out, so we know he's kind of successful. He lived in South Africa, and then he moves to Chicago to be with her, and like he travels a lot for work. But he's just kind of like her support network. And then her family, there's the mother and the father, and I think five or six siblings. They're all named and they all have their jobs. Um, but they're really just there to teach the hierarchy or explain the hierarchy of this Nigerian American family. None of them are supportive of Zelu, the main character. They are very judgmental, but it all comes from a place of love. Conform so that we could all be a harmonious, unified family. So she just kind of is the black sheep in the family because she's super individualistic and wants to chart her own path. Um, so that's kind of the main narrative part of it. And then in Rusted Robots, there are two main characters. There's Ankara, who is a Hume. She, I don't know if it's a she. It is a like robot who has a physical form and is a scholar and records the histories and stories of humanity after humans have disappeared. And the other character that we meet in Rusted Robots is Ijele, who is AI. Ijele is a nobody, so Ijele doesn't have a physical form. It's kind of like living in the ether. And then these two characters crash into each other. I don't want to give it away. So they come together and they have to figure out how to save the Earth. There you go. That's all I'm going to give you. Um, and then, so let's talk about Zelu. Zelu is the main character of Death of the Author. She is just, gosh, she is the most likable, dislikable character I've ever read. She's super opinionated and wants to do things her own way and chart her own path. And she's very adventurous. She doesn't take crap from anybody, and yet she is so confined by her family. And that dynamic is really interesting because I mean I come from an immigrant family. Like I was born in the United States, but my family immigrated here back in the 1970s. And so a lot of what I was reading about this Nigerian American family, I was like, yep, that tracks. That's like how a lot of immigrant families are, where you have to try to assimilate yourself into the community structure as opposed to charting your own path and making decisions that work well for you. And so Zelu is kind of stuck between making decisions for herself and trying to be a free moving individual versus the stuff that her family wants her to do. And so she is an academic, she's really intelligent and is a writer, but because she's paraplegic, her family and also broader Nigerian society, when she goes back to Nigeria, they view her as like almost subhuman because there's something wrong with her, and they conflate issues of like physical disability with cognitive disability. So even though she's cognitively just fine, people read her as if she is cognitively disabled. And so um, that's a really interesting kind of nugget about the way Nigeria works and the broader society in Lagos, where her family's from. So she's a super cool character to read because she makes decisions that most of us would make. Just we want to live a productive life and fulfilling life, but she's always feeling some sort of like, I don't know, pull from her family to not make those sorts of decisions, as if the decisions she's making for herself are harming the family, even though really it's just for herself. um, but it's social expectations that are put on to her by her siblings and her mom and her dad and everybody else. If you can't already tell, I love this book. It's like definitely top 10 for me. It's up there with Max Berry's Lexicon, and I don't know, reading Lolita in Tehran. So like these books that I read a long time ago that I just keep thinking about. This is one of those books. I know it's going to work its way into the rotation, just like I have a TV show rotation, like I Love Lucy and Schitt's Creek and Gilmore Girls, which they're always on in the background. This is one of those books that I'm going to keep coming back to year after year because it was that good. So I want to talk a little bit about the title because that's what initially drew me in. Death of the Author. So the phrase "death of the author," like I teach the Roland Barthes essay in some of my courses, and I think Bart wrote that article back in 1970, maybe it was in the late 60s, and this is a super simplified version of it, but basically what he was arguing is once a creative work or a piece of fiction is written and put out, the author might as well be dead because we ought not take into consideration the intent of what the author wanted. Rather, we should look at the birth of the reader, what the reader reads into these texts. Because I can read a book and bring just all of my own personal baggage to it and understand the work as meaning something, and somebody else will read it and read something totally different into it because they bring their own set of baggage into the reading process. And so that's kind of what the death of the author is. It's like once a work is put out there, the author doesn't, like the intent of the author doesn't matter all that much anymore. These days, in the 21st century, we as readers love learning about the authors because we want to know that we're reading and supporting authors who are like-minded or have, similar backgrounds to us. So like I think about queer authors and I often seek out queer authors because I want to read stories that are similar to mine. Or I'll look at Asian American writers because I want to read Asian American experiences similar to mine. And so in that way, we've kind of like reversed the death of the author and we just like make the author alive and focus too much on them, and then we want to hear what the authors say and what their intent is and see if we can read the same things into them. So like we've kind of moved away from Barthes' arguments in the 21st century, although I think it's really valid because the separation of art versus art and artist is kind of important because not all artists are perfect individuals. There's a lot that goes on with humans, and so we can't always judge the art based off of the artist. The title itself for this book works on so many different levels because Zelu, as the author in the book, she is creating a work called Rusted Robots, and she puts it out, and then her fans go nuts. They read all sorts of things into it. They create fan fiction, and she is kind of bothered by everything that's happening. There's also a film adaptation that she has to go through in the novel, and she hates the film adaptation. But again, death of the author. Like it's a creative work that is separate from Zelu, the character. So there's that. And then in Rusted Robots, how can I talk about this without giving away the whole point of the book? So the robots and the AI are created by humans and they survive after humans have died out. So literally, the authors of AI have died out in Rusted Robots. And so they're just a multiple levels that this title works. And then that last chapter, oh, how I wish I could tell you that last chapter. You just have to read this book to figure it out. But man, that last chapter just solidifies this title and makes everything just so nice, so perfect. It is such a good, surprising ending that works so perfectly with the title of the book. So anyways, I feel like I'm going on and on about how great this book is. If you haven't read it, you should. I'm leaving a link to the publishers in the description so you can go purchase a copy for yourself. If you have read it, let me know what you think. Just so good. I love this. All right, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe below. Catch you in the next video.